This story was posted by a user named Marcus Blackwell, who inherited his grandfather's journal after he passed away in 2019. What Marcus found in those pages made him question everything he thought he knew about his grandfather's death. My grandfather, Thomas Blackwell, was a lighthouse keeper on Widow's Point, a jagged piece of rock jutting out into the North Atlantic. He'd been stationed there alone for 6-month rotations since 1987. My family always thought he loved the solitude. He'd come back from each stint quieter, more distant. But we figured that's just what happens when you spend half a year with nothing but the ocean and your own thoughts. He died in his sleep at 79 years old. Natural causes, they said. But when I was clearing out his apartment, I found a journal hidden inside a locked metal box at the back of his closet. The last entry was dated November 18th, 1994. He'd had 25 more years of life after that, but he never wrote another word. I'm going to read you that final entry exactly as he wrote it. November 18th, 1994. It's been 3 months since I arrived for this rotation. Supply boat isn't due for another 3 months. I've been seeing things that can't be real, but I'm documenting them anyway because I need proof that I'm not losing my mind. It started 6 weeks ago. I was doing my evening check of the light mechanism when I heard singing. A woman's voice, clear as day, coming from the rocks below. I grabbed my binoculars and searched, but saw nothing except waves crashing against stone. The singing continued for hours. I couldn't make out the words, but the melody was beautiful and wrong at the same time. Like someone had taken a lullaby and inverted it into something that made my teeth ache. The next morning I found wet footprints leading up the stairs to the lighthouse. Small feet, a woman's feet. They stopped at my door. I told myself it was sea spray. I told myself I was imagining things. But then she appeared. I first saw her standing on the rocks during a storm. She was wearing a white dress that should have been whipping around in the wind, but it hung perfectly still, plastered to her body like she'd just been pulled from the water. Her hair was dark and stringy, covering most of her face. She stood there for hours, not moving, not affected by the rain or the waves that crashed over the rocks where she stood. I didn't sleep that night. The next day she was closer, standing at the base of the lighthouse. I could see her more clearly now. Her skin was gray, her lips were blue, and I realized with absolute horror that I could see through her, just slightly, like she was made of fog that had learned to hold a human shape. I stopped going outside. I have enough supplies, I can wait this out. But she's getting closer every day. This morning I found her standing outside the window of the light room, 80 feet in the air, just standing there in midair, her face pressed against the glass. When I looked directly at her, her mouth opened. No sound came out, but her jaw kept widening, unhinging like a snake's until her face was nothing but a gaping black hole. I boarded up that window. Tonight I can hear her inside the lighthouse. The footsteps are coming up the stairs, slow, deliberate, wet footsteps that leave puddles on the metal steps. I've locked myself in the keeper's quarters. I've pushed furniture against the door. The footsteps stopped outside my door 10 minutes ago. Now they're scratching. Long, slow scrapes against the wood, like fingernails dragging down a chalkboard. And that singing. God, that singing is right outside, and I finally understand the words. Let me in, Thomas, let me in. I've been waiting so long. Let me in, and I'll stop the water in your lungs. Let me in, and I'll stop the pressure in your head. Let me in, Thomas. Let me in before the water wins. My nose started bleeding an hour ago. It hasn't stopped. The pressure in my head is unbearable. I feel like I'm 1,000 feet underwater. My lungs are burning. Every breath sounds wet, like I'm drowning on dry land. The scratching has stopped. The singing has stopped. It's quiet now. Too quiet. I can hear water dripping somewhere in the room, but I can't find the source. The walls are dry, the ceiling is dry, but I can hear it. Drip, drip, drip. I just look down at my hands. They're gray, the same color as hers. And when I touched my face, my fingers came away wet. There's water running down my chin, but I'm not crying. It's coming from inside, from my mouth, from my nose, from my eyes. I'm drowning. I'm drowning in a locked room 80 feet above the ocean, and I can't stop it. She's inside now. I don't know how, but she's standing in the corner, and she's smiling. Water is pouring from her mouth, from her eyes, and the room is filling up. It's up to my ankles now, my knees, my waist. I can't breathe. I can't. That's where the entry ended. The ink was smudged, like water had dripped onto the page. When the relief keeper arrived 3 months later, he found my grandfather unconscious on the floor of the keeper's quarters. He was soaking wet. His lungs were full of seawater, but the room was completely dry. There was no source of water anywhere in the lighthouse. My grandfather survived, but he never spoke about what happened. He never went back to Widow's Point. And according to his medical records, for the rest of his life, he suffered from a condition the doctors couldn't explain. His lungs would spontaneously fill with fluid. Seawater specifically. They'd drain it, and within weeks, it would come back. On the night he died, the nurse said he'd been mumbling in his sleep. The same words over and over. I never let her in. I never let her in. So why won't she leave? This story was posted by a woman named Jennifer Chen, a travel blogger who documented her experience at an off-the-grid resort in the Pacific Northwest. This post was her last. Her blog hasn't been updated since. I need to write this while I still remember who I am. My boyfriend, Derek, and I booked a week at the Ashwood Lake Resort after finding it on an obscure travel forum. No website, no reviews, just a phone number and coordinates. The person on the phone said they only accepted 6 guests at a time and that we'd be disconnected from the chaos of modern life. No cell service, no internet, no TV, just nature, hiking, and peace. It sounded perfect. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon in late September. The resort was beautiful. A main lodge and 3 private cabins nestled in the woods, overlooking a pristine mountain lake. The owners, a couple named Margaret and Samuel, were in their 60s, warm and welcoming. The other guests were 2 couples, Rachel and Tom, who were celebrating their anniversary, and Lily and Marcus, who were on their honeymoon. The first 2 days were exactly what we'd hoped for. We hiked. We kayaked on the lake. We ate incredible meals that Margaret prepared. Everyone got along. It felt like we'd stumbled onto something special, a hidden gem that the rest of the world hadn't discovered yet. On the 3rd night, things started to feel off. We were all sitting around the fireplace in the main lodge after dinner when Samuel asked us a question. What's your deepest regret? It was a strange question, too intimate for people who'd just met, but the wine was flowing and someone answered. Rachel talked about not visiting her mother before she died. And then Tom went. Then Lily. Everyone shared something painful, something real. When it was my turn, I talked about my sister. How I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years over something stupid. How I didn't know if I'd ever fix it. Samuel smiled. This place has a way of helping people confront what they're running from. That night, I had the most vivid dream of my life. I was back in my childhood home, and my sister was there. She was exactly as I remembered her, but something was wrong. She kept asking me why I left her, why I abandoned her. Her voice got louder and angrier until she was screaming, and then her face started to change. Her features melted like wax, and underneath was something else, something that wasn't her. I woke up gasping. Derek was still asleep beside me, but standing at the foot of our bed was my sister. Not a dream. She was there, solid, real, wearing the same clothes from my dream. "Why did you leave me, Jenny?" she whispered. I screamed. Derek woke up. The figure vanished. He tried to calm me down, told me it was just a nightmare bleeding into waking. But I knew what I'd seen. The next morning at breakfast, everyone looked exhausted. Rachel's eyes were red from crying. Lily was shaking. When I asked what was wrong, Rachel broke down. She'd seen her mother, standing in their cabin. Tom had seen her too. Lily and Marcus had experienced the same thing. They'd both seen Marcus's ex-girlfriend who died in a car accident 2 years ago. She'd been standing in their room, dripping blood, asking why Marcus had moved on so quickly. We all looked at each other, and the terror was unanimous. This place wasn't right. We demanded to leave. Samuel and Margaret just smiled. "You can't leave until you face it," Margaret said calmly. "That's how Ashwood works. The lake shows you what you've buried. You have to confront it, accept it, or it follows you into waking life permanently." We tried to leave anyway. All 6 of us packed our cars and drove down the access road, but no matter how far we drove, we ended up back at the resort. The road just looped. Derek tried to navigate using the sun, but directions didn't matter. Every path led back. That night, the manifestations got worse. My sister appeared again, but this time she wouldn't leave. She followed me through the cabin, whispering all the cruel things I'd said to her during our last fight. When I covered my ears, I could still hear her voice inside my head. Derek tried to help me, but then his manifestation appeared. His father, who'd beaten him as a child. His father grabbed him, and I watched Derek's face contort in agony, even though no one was touching him. He was screaming, but no sound came out. I ran to the main lodge for help and found Rachel sitting in the middle of the floor, catatonic, tears streaming down her face. Her mother was standing over her, except it wasn't really her mother anymore. The thing had her mother's face, but its body was wrong. Too long, too thin, joints bending in directions they shouldn't. Tom was in the corner, rocking back and forth, his hands over his ears, mumbling incoherently. I couldn't find Lily or Marcus. Samuel and Margaret were sitting calmly at the dining table, eating dinner as if nothing was happening. "You have to accept your guilt," Margaret said. "That's the only way out." But how do you accept something when it's literally tearing your mind apart? I don't know how long I stayed in that lodge. Time felt wrong. Hours felt like days. The manifestations never stopped. My sister kept multiplying. Suddenly there were 5 of her, then 10, all surrounding me, all screaming. Then Derek stopped moving. He was standing in the doorway, but his eyes were empty, completely blank. When I said his name, he didn't respond. He just stared at nothing. That's when I realized, you don't leave this place. You either accept what you've done and find peace, or it breaks you until there's nothing left. I found Lily the next morning. She was floating face down in the lake. Marcus was standing on the shore, staring at her body, completely unresponsive. When I touched his shoulder, he didn't react. He was still breathing, but there was nothing behind his eyes. He was gone. I don't remember leaving Ashwood. I don't remember the drive home. One moment I was in that lodge, surrounded by versions of my sister, and the next I was in my apartment, alone. Derek wasn't with me. I called his phone, and it went straight to voicemail. I filed a missing persons report. The police said there's no record of an Ashwood Lake resort, no property, no owners named Margaret and Samuel, no coordinates match the location, but I have the photos on my camera, the 6 of us smiling on the first day. I've looked at them 100 times, and every time I look, there are more figures in the background. Blurry, translucent, watching us. I still see my sister sometimes. She's standing in doorways, in reflections, in crowds. She doesn't speak anymore. She just stares at me with empty eyes, and I know that I didn't escape. I'm still there. This, my apartment, my life, is just another loop, another road that leads back. Derek never came home. This story comes from a former radio technician named Alan Forrester, who worked at a small AM station in rural Montana. He posted this 3 years ago and hasn't been active on Reddit since. I worked at KVRM in 890 AM from 2009 to 2012. It was a nothing station, country music, agricultural reports, and a late-night talk show that maybe 5 people listened to. My job was simple: keep the equipment running, make sure we stayed on the air, and lock up at midnight. On November 3rd, 2011, I was doing my usual end-of-night routine when the broadcast suddenly cut out. Just dead air. I checked all the equipment. Everything was functioning perfectly. The transmitter was active, the signal was strong, but we were broadcasting pure silence. Then the signal came back. But it wasn't our programming. It was a voice. A man's voice. Calm and measured, speaking in a language I didn't recognize at first. It sounded old, ancient almost. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The voice spoke for 30 seconds, then stopped. Our regular programming resumed like nothing had happened. I was confused, but I figured it was some kind of interference. Radio signals can do weird things, especially out here in the mountains. I filed a report and went home. The next night it happened again, same time, 11:47 p.m. Dead air, then the voice. But this time I recognized a word. It was speaking English, but in a cadence and dialect I'd never heard. Old English, maybe? Medieval? The voice said, "The threshold weakens, the door remembers. Soon the appointed will cross." My blood went cold. I played back the recording a dozen times. Same words, same unsettling tone. On the third night, I invited my colleague, Sarah Mitchell, to listen with me. She didn't believe me, thought I was screwing around. But at 11:47 p.m., right on schedule, the broadcast cut out. This time the voice was different. It was layered, like dozens of people speaking in unison, perfectly synchronized. And the message was clear. Alan Forrester, Sarah Mitchell, you have heard the call. The door will open. The appointed must pass. Resistance is not permitted. Sarah went pale. How does it know our names? I had no answer. We tried to ignore it. We told ourselves it was a prank, some hacker who'd broken into our frequency. But that didn't explain what happened next. On November 6th, 3 days after the first broadcast, I woke up with a symbol burned into my forearm. Not tattooed, burned, like someone had pressed a branding iron to my skin while I slept. The symbol was circular, with geometric patterns I'd never seen before. Sarah called me that morning in hysterics. She had the same symbol on her shoulder. We compared photos, identical marks. Neither of us had any memory of how they got there. That night, we didn't go to work. We stayed together at my apartment, doors locked, lights on. We weren't going near that station. At 11:47 p.m., every electronic device in my apartment turned on simultaneously. TV, radio, laptop, phone, all of them broadcasting the same thing. that voice. You cannot refuse the call. The appointed must serve. The door will open. You will be the key. Then every screen showed the same image, a doorway, not a normal door. This was massive, carved from black stone, covered in the same symbols that were now burned into our skin. And it was opening, slowly, just a crack. And through that crack, I could see movement, shapes, things that defied geometry that hurt to look at. The broadcast ended, everything shut off. Sarah was hyperventilating. We need to leave. We need to go somewhere far away. We packed bags and left Montana that night. We drove for 18 hours straight, ending up in North Dakota. We checked into a motel under fake names. We thought we were safe. At 11:47 p.m., Sarah started screaming. She was standing in the middle of the motel room, rigid, her eyes rolled back into her head. The symbol on her shoulder was glowing, actually glowing, like molten metal. Her mouth opened and that voice came out, the same voice from the broadcast, but it was using Sarah's throat. The appointed cannot run. The door demands passage. Alan Forrester, you will comply or she will be consumed. Sarah collapsed. When she woke up, she didn't remember anything. But something was wrong with her. She couldn't focus her eyes properly. She kept looking at things that weren't there, flinching away from empty corners. Over the next week, she deteriorated. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She'd stand for hours staring at walls, whispering in that language from the broadcast. I tried to get her help. Doctors found nothing wrong. Psychiatrists prescribed medication that did nothing. On November 13th, exactly 10 days after the first broadcast, Sarah walked into traffic, deliberately. I watched it happen. She just stepped off the curb without looking directly into the path of a semi-truck. She died instantly. At her funeral, I saw him, a man I didn't recognize, standing at the back of the church. He was wearing a black suit, and on his hand was a symbol, the same symbol. He looked directly at me and nodded, then left. I haven't heard the broadcast since Sarah's death. The symbols on my arm faded after she died, leaving only faint scars. But I know it's not over. Sometimes at exactly 11:47 p.m., every clock in my house stops, just for 1 minute. And in that minute of silence, I can hear something. A low rumble, like stone grinding against stone. Like a massive door slowly opening. I don't know what the broadcast was. I don't know what that door is or what's on the other side. All I know is that Sarah went through it. She was consumed by it. And the voice said, I was appointed too. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what happened. If you ever hear a strange voice interrupting your radio speaking words you don't understand, turn it off, don't listen, don't let it know your name. Because once it calls you, you can't run, you can't hide, you're already appointed. 3 stories, 3 lives shattered by experiences they couldn't explain and couldn't escape. Thomas drowned on dry land. Derek vanished into guilt made manifest. Sarah became a key for something that should have stayed locked. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear wet footsteps or see a door that wasn't there before, or hear a voice calling your name through the static, remember these stories. Remember what happens when you answer.